Your story matters, don't let it fade. When everything changed, you were made.
When everything changed, I was standing in the living room of a single wide trailer without a stitch of furniture, except the two blow-up mattresses that my 7 and 10-year-old were sleeping on in the back room. It was silent in the house, and I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. But I could not shake this tornado of feelings that was going around inside of my body. It was anxiety and fear, but also a feeling I didn't recognize. See, I had just turned 31 years old, and this was the first time I'd ever lived on my own. And now I was a single mom. Over the next few days came a barrage of text messages just blowing up my phone, ranging from, "You're a fucking whore," to, "I want you back." And all I could think was, how the hell did I get here? How did I end up so consumed by fear? How did my life go so awry that I was in this position? What was going to happen the next week, the next month, the next years? I had no idea. Granted, I was no stranger to fear. I grew up with a stepfather who instilled so much fear in me that by age 5, I had an eating disorder. He was old school, right? So his idea was you didn't get up from the table until you ate everything on your plate. But the problem with that was he had a very unrealistic expectation of how much a 5-year-old should eat. So it would take me hours to eat a meal. So long, in fact, that a lot of times I'd get down from the table, go put on my footy pajamas, and have to come back and try and finish my meal. So many nights, this is what it looked like in our house. I grew up with a sister and 2 stepbrothers who would come on the weekends occasionally. Now, with 4 kids, you can imagine sometimes things would get a little rowdy and a little noisy, and we'd be having a good time until I would hear it. I would hear the jingle of a belt buckle from down the hall. All 4 kids would stop dead in our tracks because we knew if we woke him up from his Saturday afternoon nap, it was not going to end well for us. But fortunate for me, I was the youngest and the smallest. So by the time he got done beating the oldest 3 with his belt, he was pretty tired by the time he got to me. And to this day, the sound of a man's belt buckle jingling still makes me cringe. So for many reasons, I learned at a very young age to keep myself small, to be unseen, and to be quiet. I learned to be silent because silence kept me safe. Around age 11, I started to keeping a diary, and I wrote songs and poetry, not just as a way to escape, but also a way to be heard on paper. And now, I don't want to brag, but at 11 years old, my poetry and my songs were pretty deep. I had some pretty empowering influences, such as Air Supply and the Go-Go's. So you can only imagine. Now, my stepdad's verbal abuse was just as bad, if not worse, than the physical. And I think that's what stuck with me longest. He would say and call my sister unimaginable things that I can't even repeat. And my mom would make excuses for him. "Oh, that's just how your father is. That's just how he shows love." Funny way to show love, right? When I was in high school, I had the honor of being named a Polish Day princess. Pretty impressive, I know. I know. Don't have to bow. Um, I went through the process of writing this long essay, going in front of a board, and telling them why I wanted to become a Polish Day princess. And the odd thing is this was not my personality through school. I was definitely more of a wallflower. I kept to myself. I had a couple, close girlfriends, But this was very much out of my wheelhouse to even do. And I didn't even tell my parents that I was trying out to do this. So imagine my surprise when I was one of the girls picked as a Polish state princess. But man, was I excited the day of. I had borrowed this beautiful red dress from one of my really good friends, and I spent hours in my room doing my makeup and teasing my hair. Now, this was the early 90s, so I might have single handedly taken out the ozone layer, okay? But I was excited. I felt so good about myself. And I walked out of my bedroom, and my stepfather said to me, "Nice dress, but what are you going to do with that face?" Just shook my head and rolled my eyes, so used to it at this point. And then he said, "Well, where the hell do you think you're going, anyways?" And I said, "Well, I'm a Polish state princess." And I explained I went through the whole process. I got to be in the parade. To that, he said, "Well, how the hell do you think you're going to get uptown?" And I quick looked over at my mom, and he says, "Don't look at her. She's getting ready for work. She's not taking you anywhere." And my mom just kind of scoffed at him and said, "Bob, just take her uptown." And he said, "No, this is bullshit. She got herself into this. She can find her own ride uptown." And as they started to fight over this, I stood there with my brown paper bag of all of my clothes to change into after the parade. And I could feel my face getting hot and red and tears welling up under my eyes. And something just boiled over inside of me. And I whipped that garbage bag across the room and I screamed something like, "You're an asshole," at him, and ran to my room. And I just started bawling. And about 10 minutes went by after I heard them fighting back and forth about what a pain in the ass I was. My door flung open. It was my mom. "Let's go." She was annoyed, but she took me. I wore my sunglasses for about the first half of the parade to hide my red, puffy eyes from crying. And about halfway through the parade, when I thought, okay, it's safe, no one's going to know I was crying, I took off my sunglasses and I smiled like nothing was wrong, and I elbow wrist my way through the rest of that parade just in time to get my photo taken. That was the first time I'd ever spoke up for myself. Now, I imagine it wouldn't be a huge shock to many of you to learn that when I was 16, my first serious boyfriend was 29 years old and drove a motorcycle. Talk about poster child for daddy issues, right? My parents owned a bar. I remember one afternoon coming in off of a motorcycle ride. I walked in behind the bar, to which my stepfather announced to the entire bar, it was full, "My daughter, the dirtbag." I was so embarrassed. But as always, right? I'm going to put that mask up and I'm going to shrug my shoulders and act like I'm in on the joke. After my stepdad passed away, I had a conversation with my mom about the abuse that my sister and I had endured. To which she said, "It never happened." She completely denied it. She said, "I don't remember that happening, so it couldn't have happened." So my experience, my story, didn't matter. So I quit talking about it. Now, remember Mr. Motorcycle Man? Yeah, when I was 18, I married him, and we had 2 daughters together. And guess how that went? It was basically a repeat of my childhood, only a little bit different. For such a long time, I was so uncomfortable saying that I experienced domestic abuse. Because, well, he never hit me. He didn't punch me. So how could I claim that I experienced domestic abuse? And I struggled with that. Because in my mind, all I experienced was complete control, manipulation, excessive jealousy, and gaslighting to the point that I actually thought I was crazy and losing touch with reality. And the physical part of it, besides the verbal parts, we'd get in these heated fights and one or both of us would throw and break things in the house. But the physical parts, again, he didn't hit me, right? but he would forcefully hold me down so I couldn't move, or he would slam me against walls in the house in fits of rage. I remember going to work one day and a girl noticing these bruises on my arm. She goes, "Why does it look like those are fingerprints?" It was from an argument where he had held me down so tight his handprints were embedded in my arm as bruises the next day. I lived in this constant state of fear and anxiety. I had this heightened sense of the energy in a room because of it. And if the energy was even a little bit off, I would start to shake uncontrollably because I didn't know what was about to happen, because usually that meant something bad was about to happen. But yet I didn't like to say that I experienced domestic abuse. Recently, I actually looked up the definition of domestic abuse. It's a pattern of behaviors used by one partner to maintain power and control over another partner in an intimate relationship. Now, during all of these years, I still kept a journal and I wrote songs and poetry. I'd come up with these elaborate metaphors to put into my songs to, again, escape and to write out my story on paper. And I even got brave enough to enter some songwriting contests, and some of which I actually won. The very first lyric contest I ever won, I was so excited. I won $500 cash and a full production of my song. I was actually going to get to hear the words that I wrote on paper for the first time. And when that CD came in the mail, man, I was stoked. I called my then husband at work and I said that it's here. I get to hear my song. And when he got home that night, he never brought it up. So I never played it for him. And you want to know the ironic part? The song was called Don't Wait Up for Me. And it was about a woman who left an abusive relationship. And after 13 years of marriage, on May 26, 2006, I got to live out my own lyrics. And I walked out the door. As the years passed, I started to share my story and tell people what I had experienced. And what I got back were whispers of the people that had heard my story who said, "That never happened. What? He didn't abuse her. We didn't see it, so it couldn't have happened." So once again, my experience, my story, it didn't matter. So I quit talking about it. I did a lot of therapy after that. I did a lot of personal development to try to find who I was and figure out what path I would take in life. And that's when everything changed again. In January 2017, I came across this movement called A Complaint-Free World by a gentleman named Will Bowen. And it was about learning how to stop complaining. And again, I was trying to push the negativity out of my life, and I kept thinking, wow, what's more negative that we do than complain? So I was very intrigued, and I looked up the movement online, and I went to social media and looked up Will Bowen, the creator of this movement. And on that day, he posted, "Hey, I want to train 10 people to do what I do, to get on stage and share the complaint-free world message," because he was only one person. He'd already been on Oprah and People magazine and all kinds of news outlets, but he felt like he had just barely scratched the surface. Now, understand, I worked in a cubicle for 20 years. I never had any speaking experience. I never aspired to be a speaker or be on stage at all. But sometimes when you get that nudge to do something new, this felt more like a 2x4 to the back of my head saying, "You need to do it." And so I did. So I got to learn the art of public speaking, and I learned how to teach the complaint-free message to all kinds of organizations. And it was really cool because as I built my talk, I used the framework that Will told us of how to teach the complaint-free message. But the cool part for me was we got to incorporate our own stories. So for me, this was a lot like songwriting. I could find my own hook and how to really bring an audience into my talk and get them to lean in. So it was a very creative outlet for me. And the first few times I got on stage, whew, it was scary as hell. But it was also so exhilarating because that girl who was silent, who kept quiet for so long, was being seen and heard in a really big way. In 2019, I created a women's event, and I wanted to put other women on stage and give them a place to teach and tell their stories. And it was the first time I was going to share this very personal story of mine. And my talk was all about unchaining your inner warrior to shift from fear to focus. And man, I shared such a traumatizing experience on that stage, and I cried through the entire thing. But when I got off stage, a woman from the audience came to me in tears, and she said, "That's what I needed to hear," because that's what she was experiencing. And that was the moment I knew that my experience and my story mattered. During the pandemic, I started taking on coaching clients, entrepreneurs who also wanted to get on stage and get paid to speak. And that was my favorite part, is hearing their stories and their experiencing and finding their hook so that they could make sure that their story and their experiences mattered and they could make the impact that they really wanted to make. So storytelling became a huge passion of mine. And I realized that speaking and songwriting had a lot in common. It was all about telling the stories. And I didn't even have that realization until probably 6 months ago when I was like, oh, that makes so much sense why I love songwriting and why I love speaking, because it's all about stories. Because stories are what connect us as humans. Think about your favorite movies, music, books. We see ourselves inside of the stories. We see a piece of ourselves. We relate to one another. And in times when the world feels like it's about to implode on itself, and we can actually sit down and share our personal stories, that's what builds bridges to help us understand each other. And when you can speak your story out loud, it frees the words from the piece of paper that they're written on. And I finally realized that I had taken the metaphorical pen out of my stepfather's, my mom's, and my ex husband's hands, and I was writing my story out loud. And when I think back to that moment when everything changed, when I stood in that living room of that single wide trailer with no furniture, on my own for the first time in a single mom, feeling that tornado of feelings that I was feeling, the fear and the anxiety, and that feeling that I didn't recognize was freedom.